Shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this unique unit deep dive, we're going to be looking at the White Feather Guard. This is the castle unique unit for the Shu, which might seem strange at first. Shu are, after all, an archer and siege civilization, while White Feather Guard are infantry, though this is something we've seen before with Ethiopians, for example, and is a unit that definitely has an important role to play, along with a funky unique ability and unique tech. To start with the unit at a glance, they're pretty cheap at 60 food and 15 gold, comparable to the 50 food and 20 gold of the swordsman line. Between the castle and higher food cost, they are a little tricky to spam in the mid-game, but the lower gold cost is quite nice in the long run, and they also have a fairly quick 11-second training time, which is about half that of a longsword. Stats-wise, we immediately get some hints about their role, with unusually high HP and pierce armor, but lower attack and melee armor than your standard infantry unit. Shu are also lacking all but the first attack upgrade for melee units, again reinforcing a low attack theme. This all appears to make them very well suited for tanking damage, particularly from ranged units, given their 2 base pierce armor. Though interestingly, their description says they're good against cavalry and infantry, but highlight them as being weak against anything ranged. You can decide throughout the video if you fully agree with that description, as I personally interpret the unit a little bit differently. The anti-cavalry aspect at least is definitely true though, and reinforced with bonus damage. They actually deal a respectable +8 against cavalry, doubling that against elephants, as well as a bit against camels, some against shock infantry, and a minor +2 against buildings. The unit this instantly reminds me of is the Kamiuk, which have the same anti-cavalry, camel, and building bonus damage, but for their part have a bit more anti-elephant without the anti-shock infantry bonus. The Kamiuk obviously adds in an extra range element, and is a more expensive, heavier infantry, but I still think it's not a terrible comparison. White Feather Guard then add in a unique effect borrowed from Age of Empires 3, where they slow down, or what's sometimes called snare enemy units. Units they hit lose 15% of their speed for the next 10 seconds, resetting that timer each time they're hit. Feather Guards are a relatively slow unit themselves, and even that 15% doesn't guarantee they can keep up with all units, or even just all infantry. But you get the sense White Feather Guard are meant to be a body blocking unit, which get in the way, tank damage, and slow enemies down to achieve that goal. Further reinforcing that durability aspect is a castle unique tech for Shu called Coiled Serpent Array, which gives White Feather Guard and the Spear line extra HP when you have lots of them close together. For every 2 of a similar type nearby, they all gain +1% HP, up to a maximum of +15% once your group becomes 30 units or larger. This has a reach of 15 tiles, which is actually pretty far, and you can even co-mingle combination of White Feather Guards and pikemen to get the full effect going for both units, so the two play nice with each other. Now there are a few ways the game could have interpreted how this changes the HP of an already damaged unit. One way would be to conserve the percentage of their HP, which would mean damage taken away from the group is actually magnified, much like the damage taken by villagers before you get Loom. But in this case, the implementation is more generous than that, and instead adds new HP as a floor at the bottom. If a unit had taken 50 HP of damage already, being at 47%, when it gets close to its friends, it'll still have 50 HP off its max, being bumped up to now 54%. There's one extra bit of logic as well, that it won't drop below 1 HP if units around it are destroyed, and it'll always cling on to that last hit. I don't want to overemphasize this point, but it does mean there's a bit of a snowball effect that happens for the unit, as while they all pump each other up at the start of the fight, that also means they individually get weaker as the army is whittled down. For example, starting with 32 units, if half are removed, instead of having 50% of their starting HP left over, it's a bit less than that, as you lose the pump-up effect of those missing units. Cutting their number in half again, you likewise have less than a quarter of their starting HP, plus any damage they've taken is now subtracted from 98 instead of the starting 109, so early damage sustained is somewhat magnified. Maintaining your unit mass is definitely rewarded after getting the unique tech, which is also relatively cheap considering it's often a +10 to +15% HP boost for 2 important unit lines as Shu. With all that in mind, let's come back to what sort of role the unit can play in practice. Obviously from their bonus damage, it's clear they're anti-cavalry, and even without the unique tech pumping up each other's HP, they pretty easily beat the comparable value worth of knights with similar blacksmith upgrades. In fact, they go a step further and can trade roughly even with knights with balanced numbers, obviously with a much cheaper upfront cost, which is something not even pikemen can do in Castle Age, despite a much larger attack bonus. Pikemen are technically more cost effective in large numbers, but what White Feather Guard add on top is pop efficiency, plus more versatility than pikemen. Fighting pikemen head-to-head, for example, it's not even close, as pikes really are just an anti-cavalry bonus in a trench coat, and are not well-rounded melee units outside of that, with even less melee attack than feather guards. Eagles are actually even worse off, as White Feather Guard have a surprisingly good anti-shock infantry bonus, and I assume this and the result against pikes is what the devs mean when they say the Feather Guard is anti-infantry. Outside of these very light infantry examples though, I think that description may be slightly misleading. White Feather Guard have no general anti-infantry bonus on top of 0 melee armor and fairly low attack, so even if we now add their unique tech to pump up their starting HP, they pretty convincingly lose to even generic longswords with decent starting numbers. Obviously, once you get into actually good heavy infantry, things devolve from there. So while anti-cavalry I completely agree with, the anti-infantry part I'm less sold on, at least when the unit is left on its own. Instead, one of the things I think Feather Guards are best suited for is tanking ranged units. Certainly compared to the Shu's other melee options, as admittedly neither an infantry nor cavalry civilization, White Feather Guards become their most resilient melee unit against crossbows, with up to 37 shots taken with their unique tech, but already a respectable 32 without that. They're also your most tanky non-siege option against skirmishers. Keep in mind, unlike pikemen, they don't take anti-spear bonus damage from those or crossbows, which massively contributes to their tankiness. White Feather Guard are kind of slow though, and certainly aren't a general range unit counter like some of the more specialized infantry units for that. Cavalry archers are particularly hard to deal with, but like many unique units, you have to think about all of this within the context of the Shu, which remember are an archer in siege civilization. Shu have a bonus to help an archer into crossbow transition, as well as a unique replacement for the Scorpion, which either open you up to skirmisher or cavalry counters, and is exactly where the Feather Guard slots in. As we've seen, they're very anti-cavalry, even pop efficient against knights thanks to bonus damage, meanwhile slowing them down and simultaneously resisting enemy crossbows and especially skirmishers. Any firepower needed against infantry comes from your real DPS units, the crossbow or war chariot. In fact, I think it's slightly missing the point to look at how good the White Feather Guard is alone, and it's better to think about how perfectly it complements the key ranged units that you're probably already making if you just follow your bonuses. Next though, let's touch on the Imperial Age. Here they have a 900 food and 500 gold elite upgrade, which is pretty middle of the road in cost, giving them 5 more HP, plus 1 attack, a somewhat random plus 1 extra against camels, as well as plus 1 pierce armor. You also have the final armor upgrade, so collectively can give them plus 3 pierce armor in Imperial, at least keeping pace with Arblester's plus 1 attack on top of Bracer and Chemistry. These are, of course, a little controversial, but Shu also have their hero unit in the Imperial Age, which actually plays well with the White Feather Guard by healing nearby units 45 HP per minute. For Feather Guard that are just supposed to block and slow down units while tanking as much damage as possible, healing is kind of the ideal effect to add to the unit to make it even better at what it does. Historically, White Feather soldiers were also the bodyguards of Liu Bei, the Emperor of the Shu, so they're very on point here thematically as a combo as well. In context, the very high HP, but also very low attack quality of the elite White Feather Guards really becomes obvious beside a Shu champion, with 30 extra HP and a very solid 7 pierce armor, but 6 less attack, which would actually be 9 less attack than a generic champion with all blacksmith upgrades. Having just 9 attack in particular jumps out, and presumably their spears are tipped with feathers, as they have even less melee attack than a generic halberdier, and it's the only way any of this makes any sense. They still match up well against cavalry, beating even paladins cost effectively for instance, and with balanced resources trade pretty much evenly with even frank paladins. With similar numbers, halberdiers do perform a little bit better, and the choice between the two comes down to various factors, particularly your gold situation and whether your opponent has a lot of skirmishers or archers, which would implicitly favor Feather Guards. I still think there are caveats calling White Feather Guard anti-infantry, as generic champions really have no problem against them whatsoever. Though again, that's not necessarily a problem for Shu in practice, as their core units are an Arblester which can fire 3 arrows after an Imperial Age unique tech, and the War Chariot, which particularly in focus fire mode against a group can be just as dangerous. The White Feather Guard only has to keep enemy infantry in one spot, and just let those units do the work. Likewise, everything in Castle Age against ranged units is still true, with White Feather Guard arguably standing out even more this time, as heavy Haiguang cavalry are your only other melee unit with even close to the same durability, albeit for a much higher cost. That said, I don't mean to rag on the archer weakness in the description too much, as I get the sense in which they meant it. It's not like your opponent is going to mass archers and your response is to beeline for White Feather Guard. This isn't the Huskarl. They're just your best melee shield out of a whole bunch of not very anti-archer melee units available. Even in those seemingly more ideal cases though, other options can still make sense over Feather Guards. If your archers are running into a lot of skirmishers, do have serviceable light cavalry, which can help you save on gold. Likewise for war chariots against a ton of enemy light cavalry, which can mess with their minimum range, it can also make more sense to just use the cheaper spear line to protect your already gold-intensive war chariots. And the more generalist qualities of the White Feather Guard do come at the cost of gold and an extra castle requirement. You really pay for what you get in this case. Speaking of premium white feathers though, feathers are of course useful for all sorts of things, from restuffing down pillows to using as quills or feather dusters. If you're looking for high quality feathers for any number of applications, look no further than my Feather Emporium, Spirit of the Flock. You can order a bag of feathers yourself off a new website I made with this video's sponsor Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a great-looking website, engage with your audience, and then sell anything from products to content to time all in one place. Using either their pre-made templates or Squarespace's AI-enhanced website builder, you can create a fully customized website to suit your needs. It's perfect for building an online presence for a physical business or starting an online store using their built-in tools for inventory and shipping, with plenty of analytics to give you insight about your website's traffic and sales. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/spiritofthelaw to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So that's a look at the high-flying use cases of White Feather Guards. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.